So at this point, you've probably heard of the Sony A7IV and the FX3 and how incredible these cameras truly are. And by now you're probably asking yourself the question, so which is best for me? After using the Sony FX3 for 3 years and the A7IV for 2 years, I've become very familiar with these cameras. And I've learned that even though they have their key differences, they also can complement each other in surprising ways if you know what to look for. I get a ton of questions about these cameras specifically, how they compare to each other, what their main differences are, and whether it's worth buying one, switching to the other, or using both together. So in this video, I just wanted to answer some of those questions as well as give you a few of my thoughts to help you choose the right one. But before I do, my name is Ryan, and if you're new with us, welcome. I truly appreciate you being here. So a little over a year ago, I published a video all about the Sony FX3 and the A7IV, going over some of the key differences and which might be best for you. Definitely check that out if you're interested. I'll link it down below if you'd like to learn more. And to this day, that video still gets a whole lot of really great questions in the comment section. So I wanted to answer some of those for you today to hopefully shed a little bit more light on these cameras and help you make your purchasing decision. But really quick, I feel like it's important to mention that this video is not sponsored by Sony. However, I do really love these cameras. I use them in all of my work. So these are just my opinions and thoughts just based off the experience that I have with these cameras. All right, enough of all that. Let's get into the video. So the first question is from Matt, and he said, I shoot a pair of A7IV bodies for commercial work and pro rodeo. By the way, if you like rodeo content, his is really good. Definitely check his channel out. I recently rented an A7III and the low light capability really makes the sensor something special. So I'm considering the FX3. The biggest thing that hurts the A7IV for me is the 1.5x crop at 4K, 60 frames per second. Yeah, this is a little bit of an issue. For me personally, I don't mind the crop, but I think for him, more specifically, he is filming sports content, rodeo content. So I'm assuming most likely he's using a zoom lens. Using a zoom lens is gonna compress the image enough. And when you're getting in tight like that, you definitely wanna have a little bit more room. So I can understand how a crop sensor could kind of mess things up a little bit. Hey, Future Ryan here. I heard something interesting about this crop since I recorded that talking head, so I just thought I would share that with you. I was watching a video from Shopak, I think I said that right, but he said something interesting in that video, and I think he referenced this from someone else, but basically he said the crop at 60 frames per second could be a problem if you're a run and gun filmmaker, like let's say a documentary filmmaker, or say that you do a lot of the B-roll of your YouTube videos on the fly, on the go, and you're trying to film something and all you can see is this really tight frame. That could be a little bit frustrating. However, if you do have time to plan your videos out, then this could be less of a problem because you can then just plan for the shot, back the camera up a little bit, you could set up your shot, and you're good to go. But just to push this a little bit further, if I were to watch this myself for the first time, I probably wouldn't have guessed that that was at a 1.5x crop. I probably would have just assumed that it was full frame or not even really think about it at all because most people aren't really thinking about it. Here is a side-by-side at 24 frames per second. And then of course, at 60 frames per second, you can see a big difference there. There is a full-on crop in. So this is just one of those things, you know, it has one of those quirks because it's gonna be at a lower price point than something that's gonna have 60 frames at full frame. For me, I liked the price point and all that it could do. It really is an incredible camera. So the crop didn't really affect my purchasing decision personally, but I could totally see how this could affect your workflow if you are at 60 frames per second a lot and you need full frame. I totally get that. So this is just something to consider if you are thinking about purchasing the A7IV. Aiden says, hey, definitely need some insight. Canon shooter for a decade, mainly photos, but more than half of my clients are having me do more video. Switched to Sony. I was torn between the A7IV and the FX3, chose the A7IV, having buyer's remorse, and it hasn't even been delivered yet. Thinking are ready to switch and do the FX3. The hang up is I have clients that want hybrid work. Options on FX3 stills. This is where the choice between the two can get a little bit difficult. If you are a photographer who does video, but your main gig is to take photos, you might want to consider the A7IV because it's going to have a higher megapixel. It really just depends on what you're shooting though. So I too am a photographer and I've done a lot of commercial work, things that are gonna go on billboards and magazines. And so I needed something that was going to be good for my clients. And here's why this is important, because if I were to use the FX3, which has a much lower resolution when it comes to photos, which by the way, the FX3 can take photos, but I don't recommend using it for something that's gonna go on a billboard and be blown up to where you could see almost every pixel on the photo. However, if you are mainly taking photos for a website or something like that, the FX3 should work fairly well. I don't shoot photos with my FX3, but I have heard things online about taking photos and people seem to love them, especially for social media. But if you're shooting for print and especially bigger prints like billboards or things like that, I would highly recommend grabbing the A7IV or some other hybrid camera that's gonna do video really well, but also photo really well. However, if you're a photographer and you're transitioning into video work and you really wanna get into the film aspect of video, like say short films or TV commercials, narratives, things like that, I would go with the Sony FX3 and maybe pick up, an older photo camera. I have a Canon as well. I have the Canon 6D. That's something that I used to use about 5 or 6 years ago. Next question asks, would you use either of these cameras for documentaries? I would. And as a matter of fact, I have shot a few documentaries now on the Sony FX3 A7IV as our B camera on one of the most recent ones. But if you take a look at this footage here, this is my latest documentary, Ago. This entire film was on the FX3 and a little bit with the A7 III and A7IV, I believe, at the end there, because this film took a few months to create. We had to do some reshoots and things like that. But anyway, most of this was done with the FX3. You can do the same thing with the A7IV. Future Ryan here, just wanting to show you a little bit of the comparison between the two cameras, the FX3 and the Sony A7IV. Now, this scene that you watched earlier in the video was all filmed with the Sony A7IV, for the exception of a couple of shots, just because I was trying to beat the blue hour light. And so I had both cameras set up so I could move faster. But most of this sequence was with the Sony A7IV. Now, if you compare these two shots here, both of these shots are shot, one on the left that is the A7IV and the one on the right is the FX3. They both look very similar, so I would argue that it's not so much the camera, I would argue it's more the story and the lighting. And let me show you what I mean. This shot is actually not being lit by the sunlight behind the character, it's actually being lit by this small 60-watt light. Now, this is a 60-watt light, very small, very compact, very portable, and it really works. And that's because the sun is coming up right behind me there, and I already have light to motivate this studio light. So all I had to do was match the color temperature and bring that light in on the lit side of my face, shoot on the shadow side, and there you go, you've got a pretty cinematic style image. Now the sun is coming up right behind me. My shot is completely blown out, so give me 1 second. There we go, much better. Okay, so the other thing I would argue is that there's a little bit of story here. So when you have a narrative, it's pushing our story along. Sorry, my kids are feeding the ducks and the chickens right now. These two things really drive it. So yes, the camera looks really good and either one of these is gonna be great. I guess my main point in all of this is that you totally can use the FX3 or the A7IV for any type of project that you want. If you were to film a documentary or even a narrative film, TV commercial, whatever it is, a YouTube video, both of these cameras are gonna be really great. And if you wanted to use these two together, I would highly recommend it because you now have an A camera and a B camera and a stills camera, and you don't have to buy 3 cameras, you just have the 2, which is what I did, what I wanted, what I was looking for when I was researching these cameras. Just something that I wish I could have seen online. I don't see a whole lot of people talking about how these cameras pair up together a whole lot. So if you already have the A7IV or the FX3 and you wanna get the other, definitely highly recommend it. But beyond all the camera gear, the number one thing that's most important in the filmmaking process is you. Your experiences and unique view of the world will be reflected in your work and is what people want to see. So whatever camera you pick up, and as always on this channel, I just want to encourage you to stay the course and keep making films, because you've got this, friend. There is a whole lot more about these cameras that I covered in my last video, so I linked that up here. If you liked this video or you learned something, please click the like button down below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers, friend.